Now let me turn to our next guest speaker, one that I'm proud every day to know and I consider a good friend of mine, Mary Nichols. Mary, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're delighted to have you. Mary, as many of you know, is the chair of the California Air Resources Board. She's recognized both regionally, well, beyond regional, national, and internationally. She was appointed originally as chair by Governor Schwarzenegger. She previously served under President Clinton as assistant administrator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Air and Radiation Program. Not quite sure what you did on the radiation front, Mary, but we can talk about that. But Mary is truly an icon in the environmental arena. She brings a candid and honest approach to a very difficult job and is overseeing many world-renowned energy quality improvement programs. I think of no one who's more dedicated to the cause than you, Mary, and we are so honored to have you here today. Mary Nichols.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't spend your time immersed in California state politics and government, let me welcome you to Sacramento. You will probably already have noticed that this isn't like Washington, D.C. In a lot of ways, one of which, of course, is what I'm going to talk about a bit, and that is the fact that here in California, climate policy and the effort to address climate change is an organizing concept for much of what we're doing, not just in the environmental regulatory area, but in all of our economic development and environmental activities as well. It has really, over the last decade, become the overarching policy driver in California for efforts related to air quality, energy, transportation, land use, waste management, agriculture, forestry, and increasingly a focus of our efforts to create greater opportunities and greater equity in low-income and disadvantaged communities. For myself, as a longtime resident of Los Angeles, who only drops in here from time to time to go to work, I am used to living in a place that people often like to call La La Land. And for those of you who saw that movie, you probably remember the opening scene, which is by far the most famous part of the movie, where people are parked basically along Pacific Coast Highway with the Pacific Ocean in the background and Malibu and on the other side, and the traffic jam is so bad that they're all just stopped. So they get out of their cars and start dancing. And it's a great dance scene, a great choreographed scene. And in some ways it's kind of emblematic of how people think of California as a whole, which is a place where people's aspirations and dreams are completely out of sync with what's actually going on, right? We're just not realistic about things. On the other hand, that total lack of recognition of what some would consider to be the iron laws of reality, in fact, has worked to attract not only dreamers, but also pioneers of all kinds. But it hasn't necessarily led us to a state of sustainability. And I think maybe that's kind of the theme of what I would like to talk about. Climate change is a thread that runs through just about every speech that our governor gives, and you will have noticed in our speakers this morning, it runs through the work of the CAISO, and you would find it pretty much everywhere else you went. In the case of our governor, he literally travels around the globe forging partnerships and talking to people about this existential threat, as we call it. And our legislature has not been slow to exert its leadership as well in some really remarkable ways. In particular, it has worked to strengthen the connections among our various efforts, which once were completely separated, dealing with air pollution and energy policy and equity. Last year, the legislature committed California to strong, but we think appropriate targets to slash carbon emissions and short-lived super climate pollutants by at least 40% by 2030. And this has very major implications, especially for agriculture in our state, because a large proportion of those short-lived climate pollutants are methane. They followed it up this year by extending the cap and trade program, which is probably our most famous climate policy, through 2030, and directing my agency, CARB, to literally look at air pollution in a whole different way. Previously, under the direction of the Clean Air Act, which we in turn as Californians helped shape back in the 70s, we looked at air pollution from a regional perspective in airsheds. Now we're directed to focus our attention at the neighborhood level, that is, to get down to the level of communities, particularly communities that are adjacent to major industrial activities, including our ports and airports, which are at the hub of our economic development and growth, and to make sure that people in those communities are also experiencing clean, healthy air at the same time. To support our integrated climate, air, and equity objectives, the legislature has also appropriated billions of dollars, some of it, a large portion of it, coming from the proceeds of the allowances for greenhouse gas emissions that we auction, but also much of it from fees and other sources as well. Many of these investments specifically look at ways to target investments in economic development in the most disadvantaged communities. And we've seen really a transformation in places like Kern County, which when I first started working in the air field back in the 1970s would have been the place I probably would have described as being the least friendly to any kind of environmental policy. Kern County is now literally the epicenter of solar development in California, and there's quite a different attitude out there about renewable energy and all the jobs that come with it. Fully integrating climate action and public health as well as equity is certainly an area where our state is pioneering. And if we can pull it off, as we intend to do, it really would represent California's most significant environmental and social contribution. Climate change, as I've said, is really embedded in all that we're doing, and I think it's going to continue to frame just about everything we do looking forward. For a more detailed summary of the many different programs that we are in the midst of implementing, I would direct you to something called the Scoping Plan, which is the ARB's effort to lay out in a hopefully readable form our overall plan for how we're going to get to 2030. We're going to be releasing a revised draft of that plan very soon, and we aim to finalize it by the end of the year. It isn't really fully baked in the sense of being precise descriptions of how every regulation will work, but it lays out in considerable detail an array of different regulations and how we think they work together in a comprehensive way and create a pathway to meet or exceed our very ambitious emissions goals. It certainly is anchored in the cap and trade program, which we are now implementing as a market that includes our partners in Quebec and Ontario. And we've seen recently an increasing level of interest on the part of jurisdictions in other parts of the world that are starting to take seriously the implications of the Paris Accord and try to find ways that they can come up with their own plans that will achieve the ambitious target of staying under 2 degrees centigrade in terms of our increasing temperatures. But the scoping plan also includes a number of very targeted policies in every major sector, including strong renewable and energy efficiency targets, a comprehensive approach to looking at transportation by requiring more efficient electric cars, cleaner fuels through a low-carbon fuel standard, and better use and planning to reduce the costs and the need of travel. It includes a dedicated focus, backed by significant public and private investments, to improve the whole area of goods movement and to cut pollution from the freight sector. It includes strong targets to cut emissions of the short-lived climate pollutants like HFCs from refrigeration systems, as well as methane from not only oil and gas systems, but from landfills and even dairies. And it highlights our increasing focus on better incorporating natural and working lands, including our forests and our soils and other things in those efforts. And I, too, would be remiss if I didn't mention that in a situation where we have lost so much of our forested land just in the last year as a result of devastating fires, it's important to think not only about how we help people rebuild their lives and their communities, but also how we're going to deal with an incredible loss of a very valuable place where we were storing carbon at the same time. And the plan itself highlights some of the ways that we hope to pursue the successes that have been achieved, while recognizing that not everything you do works out as well as you had hoped. But I think the broad commitment that we've made and that we've maintained, and the fact that the legislature did act this year promptly and with very broad support to renew its commitment to a cap-and-trade program, helps to provide the certainty that businesses need to plan and that markets need to flourish. Of course, policy and plans are only one element of a successful approach to achieve our ambitious environmental and economic goals. We also need technology, and we need the finance that will help that technology to survive and to spread. And those parts of the equation are coming along pretty well, too. In fact, in the case of technology, once again, it's exceeding our plans and prescriptions and moving faster than anybody had predicted just a few years ago. In fact, just a decade ago, when we were developing our very first scoping plan under the original California climate program, which was aimed at achieving just what seemed then a very, very ambitious 20% 2020 goal, that is, of reducing emissions by about 40% of what they would have been, there really wasn't any utility scale solar around. Renewable diesel and renewable gas weren't words that we were even talking about. And to the extent that we envisioned electric cars and renewable electricity playing important roles in our future, cost parity was assumed to be decades away. The word moonshot was often used to describe that challenge. Well, it's been just a decade, and the Department of Energy has just announced that we have met our sunshot target, and we did it 3 years early. The cost of utility scale solar power has dropped 80% since 2010, and has now hit clear benchmarks of cost competitiveness with other conventional sources of power. Electric cars are making similar remarkable progress. McKinsey & Company estimates that the average battery pack costs have dropped about 80% also since 2010, and a number of analysts are now seeing unsubsidized cost parity for electric cars coming by the middle of the next decade, if not sooner. As a result, renewable power generation is outpacing requirements under our legislative renewable portfolio standard. Sales of electric and hydrogen-powered cars are outpacing what the state required under our zero-emission vehicle rule. And let's not forget about clean fuels. The market in California for renewable substitutes is growing just as fast as markets for renewable power. Since 2012, renewable diesel fuel has increased its market share in California by about 2.9 percentage points annually, the same as renewable electricity. In addition to this, you could say, well, at what cost? And I think here perhaps it's an even brighter story in terms of the investment that has been attracted to our state because of our policies and because of the opportunity that people see here. We lead the country in installed solar capacity 6 times higher than the next state, and we're home to nearly half of all the zero-emission cars on the road in the United States. We have more clean energy jobs and jobs in energy efficiency than any other place in the country, and these jobs are growing, the sector of jobs growing 6 times faster than other types of employment in our state, although we're experiencing growth overall. We attract more than 2/3 of all the clean tech venture capital investment in the country, and these investments are coming from a variety of different sources, including utilities and other businesses and households as well. And the state itself, of course, is also investing its own resources in creative ways to further scale private investment and to help maintain this progress that we're already seeing, especially looking towards our role as infrastructure providers for electric cars, clean trucks, and low-carbon fuels. So the state's role in the transportation sector is really critical in the development of that market. So what does all this mean for the future of electricity, and how does electricity fit into this burgeoning clean economy? Well, clearly electricity is at the center of it all. As transportation increasingly and quickly becomes electrified, our utilities have already been given a new role under Senate Bill 350 as transportation fuel suppliers. They are in the business of competing for dollars from the customers to fuel the cars that people drive. Buildings will become more electric, renewable power, continued efficiency and energy storage and demand response, all promise to remake the grid, perhaps in relatively short order. And again, it's hard not to think about the opportunity presented by disaster if you look at whole areas where our existing power lines are implicated in some way in what's happening with the fire situation, where they go through areas that are fire prone and are resulting and are prone to disaster. On the one hand, it's a huge testament to the quality of our electric utilities and their people, as well as to the firefighters that we have out there from all over the country, that we've kept electric service going in so many ways and experienced so little in the way of downtime or losses in that system. But at the same time, it's also an example of the inherent fragility of the system that we live with today, just as the changes that are going on in the business with communities popping up all over the place wanting to become their own utilities is threatening the old ways in which we were comfortable that this electricity was going to be provided. But as a whole, the sector has an important role to play in helping to find ways to create beneficial and flexible loads that can reduce emissions, balance the grid as it is. We may also see more renewable electricity and electricity used in a different way, including to help sustain our existing supplies and use of natural gas. We know that we're going to continue to rely on natural gas for existing uses for a long time to come. We need to ramp up our efforts to increase the fraction of that gas that's coming from renewable resources as well. And we need to look to the electricity sector once again to help us to create more feedstock for hydrogen production, desalinization, and to synthesize renewable supplies of natural gas and liquid fuels. So again, another role for this incredibly versatile fuel. Actions at the local level, the micro level, will certainly shape the future of electricity, as individuals and communities increasingly want to take control over their own sources of supply and use with solar storage, electric cars, and buildings equipped with smart thermostats responding to new rates, so too will actions at the macro level. We know that if we can integrate our grid better with our neighboring states, we could deliver efficiencies at the system level more broadly that would help to serve not only to reduce emissions, but also to keep down costs for everybody. Now, the Clean Power Plan that the federal government enacted is effectively gone. It provided a framework with which some of those actions could have been implemented, where states were given a strong incentive to work together to collectively reduce their emissions and costs. Without it, however, it will be up to the states, to the public utilities commissions, and the grid operators to figure it out. And if they can't figure it out, I suspect that the private sector will find a way to do it as well, because it just makes too much sense not to find ways to work at the regional level. In many ways, the future of electricity in California is very much a microcosm for our broader approach to climate change. There are challenges, to be sure, but there's also opportunity, and I think the opportunity to grow sustainably is greater than the challenges. Capturing that opportunity is, again, going to be a matter of individual action and political will. So if we have overall the policies and the technology and the financial capacity, what's stopping us? Well, really just about nothing. We have so many creative people, women and men, who've come to our state to start or grow businesses or to be involved in one way or another in our economy as voters and as active members of our state, and to better their own lives and achieve their own ambitions. We see that pursuing prosperity together is not a choice, but something that we do in a very holistic way. That is, we all are committed to economic growth, opportunity and equity, as well as health. And these desires and wishes are embodied in legislation that we are currently implementing. So it's not just a matter of hyperbole or rhetoric, it's actually state law that we're using here as the organizing principle for our activities. And of course, it is also a product of that amazing, relentless optimism and spirit of California embodied in all of those dreamers who come here and try out things, including trying to dance on the Pacific Coast Highway. So I hope that all of you, whether you're here because you work in California or because you're an ally and customer of the CAISO, will join us in this activity. And I wish you the very best with the rest of your conference. Thank you.